again, I'm Beau Sorenson with the South Carolina Forage and Grazing Lands Coalition. Today we've got a rainfall simulator set up. It's going to demonstrate what happens to our soils and runoff of rainfall on various different types of cover. What we're most interested in here is our soil health principles, which are keep the soil covered, keep the soil with diversity, so diversity of cover crops, diversity of crops. We want to have the soil alive, so living roots as much as possible. So as much time of the year, we want things living and growing, and we want to have no disturbance, covered soils, and then we also want to integrate livestock into these operations. Now I recognize for crop farmers, row crop farmers, that's probably not a good situation, but for soil health, those are the 5 principles. So in this demonstration, we're going to put on about 1 inch of rain in just about 10 minutes or so, which I think you guys had that yesterday, didn't you? That was a pretty good rainstorm yesterday. So what I've got is I've got a soil sample from Orangeburg, Calhoun County, kind of on the line between there. This is a cornfield that had been a peanut field, so this one's going to be the most representative sample to what you guys probably are going to be growing or looking at doing if you had cover crop and if you had a crop rotation, reduced tillage. This sample is a pasture land from Blythewood area, so it's got a little bit more of the red clay. And this is a pasture sample that has continuously planted annual crops in no-till. So this farm has not been tilled in 10 or 15, 20 years, and it's only been annually planted with forages. And so there's no perennial forage ever planted on that farm. So this field happened to be sorghum was in this when I took the sample, and it was this tall. The steers hadn't been in there yet. This sample is going to mimic, basically these two are going to be very similar. They're both pasture scenarios, so this one would represent kind of an overgrazed, maybe a little bit overgrazed situation. And then this one's going to represent one with residue. I recognize that's corn residue. Just imagine if that was just regular grass residue. And then this one's going to be representative of a continuous till situation. So this is a soil that's been continuously farmed and nice and clean, and what what folks are usually kind of what you see a lot of out there on the ground. So we're going to turn this on. Maybe. And we're going to put some water on this, and we're going to observe what's going on. So the shield on the front is just there to protect the water sample as it goes into the bucket for the runoff. So it's really there just to keep the integrity of the samples. So as this goes, what are your initial observations right now? Yeah, so just with barely, an 1/8 of an inch of rain, it's already starting to erode from that conventional till soil. Yeah. I made sure there wasn't a terrace there.
Does that represent a certain slope?
It does. I did not measure it. I'm not sure.
What kind of guess?
I don't want to guess. I'd have to measure it. It is a slope of probably 5%, 6%. So when we lose runoff like this on that conventionally farmed field, we're also losing nutrients, we're losing organic matter, we're losing any pesticides that's attached to those soil particles. When we get to losing this much soil, we're actually losing the soil particles themselves. And so you're also having that soil loss per acre, tons per acre. And so from a highly erodible land standpoint, if you've got highly erodible land, this is going to exceed the allowable erosion rate. And then we can see on the other ones, we're starting to get some runoff. Notice that one that's in continuous till, or continuous no-till, the second one over, we're not seeing any runoff yet on this one. So again, it's a forage system, but it's no-till, and it has annually planted crops, and then they're removed by grazing. So very similar to a crop situation, but it has that livestock component. There's about a ½ inch of rain. Any questions while we're just waiting here for a second for the rainstorm to finish? Observations? We're not done. We're not done yet. So I assume most of the farmers out here would prefer to have the water on their ground, not on their neighbor's ground. So that's another observation you can make here, is on this conventionally tilled soil at that slope, that water is not going to end up on your farm. It's going to end up on someone else's or down the stream somewhere else. So one of the things I like to talk about is just trying to capture every drop of rain you can on your farm. And we're still not quite at an inch yet. We're getting there.
So have you ever done one with live plants?
Yes, I have done one with like a live cover crop. Yep, that was the very first one I did, and that was probably back in 2009. And I grew some with cover crops. And it's funny you should say that, because I have a bag of Ray's remix, his Ray's remix. That is the new one that he's got, just cool season, that I'm going to plant in one of these trays, probably today. So the next demo I'll have some live cover. And then I'll set these out and see if they don't revive from being dormant. So there's just about an inch of rain right there. So we'll turn this off. And then again, as that trickles off of there, let's just take a look. So notice the difference here on runoff. This could be just a difference in the soil type that's between these two, but it also could be that I've got the samples a little bit too, so I tried to redo these samples a little bit, and it could be this was just a little bit high in the tray. And so that's why you're seeing more runoff on that one. So sometimes it's not exactly, exactly the results we would expect, but I think it's clear to see this is a lot different than the one on the far left as far as what's run off. So I'm going to set these down. The other thing to notice is just the clarity of the water. What runoff we did have off that field that was in a no-till or reduced till situation is much cleaner water. And again, this is just by looking at it visually, visual representation, but we can make the leap that this is definitely going to have far less nutrients and soil particles that have left the field than, say, this one here. And we could actually stratify this one. We could let this one sit for a little bit, and you would actually, in fact, you already can start to see it starting to separate into sand, silt, and clay. So it's actually going to show that there's a lot of soil went into that sample. All right, so now we're going to do the big reveal here. We're going to take a look and see what happened in the soil. So what are our observations on this one? Any observations?
Nothing infiltrated on the conventional.
Yeah, nothing went through on our conventional till. So in that particular rainstorm, when this field is between crops, we didn't capture any of that water. It just went out. It went over the ground. Now there's some that's in this in a holding capacity. There is an available water holding capacity of a soil, and there certainly is some water in here, but none of it went down into the soil profile, deep into the soil profile. We did see that in the pasture situation, and again, that represents kind of those live roots, the living roots, higher organic matter soils. in a perennial, forage type situation, we have a lot better infiltration of water. And then notice what the cover crop one did, or the annually planted forage crops. That one's, from a weight standpoint, that tray is half the weight of the other trays because there's so much organic matter in that. And so just imagine, so it's able to, the water's able to just flow right down through into that lower profile. And then the one on the far right, again, would be kind of just I think it was peanuts and corn, and I'm not sure what the third rotation was. But again, you're not seeing a lot of water infiltration. Why do you think that might be? Residue.
The biomass is residue.
Yeah, the residue is holding a lot of that. The soil's holding some because the infiltration rate was slowed down enough to where the water could seep into this soil. So the kinetic energy of a raindrop is dispersed when it hits residue, whereas when it hits bare ground, the energy is dispersed by hitting particles of soil, which are basically made airborne then. So on this one, I just want to note, I figured out why this one would look this way, why it would not have as much water in there. Any other ideas? It's a fault in my experiment. So any of the water that hit these edges, the water ran off the residue outside of the container.
So it's going out the floor.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, it didn't capture all of the water.
Got it.
So this really needed to be tucked in inside the tray. So
Can you go through just one more time for those who just arrived, the different arrangement of the residue?
Of course.
The different treatments.
Yes,
from
of course.
there to here.
So then the first one we have here is a peanut corn field. It was in peanuts, it's corn. It was just harvested. It's in that Orangeburg area, and this residue is representative of what was out there that day, but it was actually quite a bit deeper. But you can only put so much on here. This is a field in the Blythewood area. It's a continuously farmed field with no-till farming practices, and they continuously plant annual grasses, cool season and warm season, at least twice per year. And so there's always something growing in this soil, and then it's also grazed quite heavily, but it can handle it because of the diversity of the forage. This one is representative of a grazing situation of a pasture, as is this one. These two are both pasture. I just took some residue and added residue to this one just to see what it would look like. And again, not quite the result I would have expected out of these two. But we did see, comparing the pasture to a conventional farming situation, how much difference there can be. This sample is just compacted, conventionally tilled soil out of a bucket, dumped into the tray, smoothed out. So that's what conventional till soil would look like.
And for a farmer, a lot of bills of watering, irrigation, because the water is going straight out.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about irrigation water. Yeah, what that could be doing for your bottom line.
Right.
You're paying a lot of money to put water on a field that's not staying there.
Yeah.
For sure. And then of course infiltration rate has something to do with that. This was a storm event. An irrigation system will be putting that water on at a much slower rate, hopefully able to absorb.
So essentially this one, second one to my left, you're right, that's a row crop with cover crop.
I would consider this a no-till row crop type situation. Yep. Even though there was no commodity crops grown on this one,
Right.
it had sorghum, it had corn, it had different forage crops, but it's never been tilled. Well, it hasn't been tilled in the last 10 or 15 years. So if we tested organic matter, this would be quite high. And then the other dramatic thing about this one is this is in that red clay region of the South Carolina. So any other questions? Any other observations? Other thoughts? Does this help with the cover crop discussion that you had earlier today about why it's important to have cover crops and why they're talking about protecting that soil, keeping it covered?
Beau, you shared a number the other day about the amount of soil that gets taken off.
Yeah, so the width of your thumbnail is, or the depth, the thickness of your thumbnail is about a ton of soil per acre. And so I would estimate that this one is probably eroding at 10 tons per acre, just from looking at it. So again, that soil's gone. It's not going to be on your field next year. It doesn't come back. And that's been happening in South Carolina for hundreds of years. So we're farming soils that are already depleted of organic matter. And that slide up there showed organic matter being at like 5%. I don't know that it was ever that high in the last 100 years here because of the previous farming practices. We're looking at, 1% or less. And we can get to something that's going to be 5% or more, just without tillage and cover crops.
Do you have any numbers about how long it takes to build soil organic matter
What they
up
need to do is
after
do
it's
like a
been
real
reduced?
I don't
More
have
like
any
a
numbers on that. But I'm
quarter
sure
acre
the
per
plot
plot.
do.
See what the ROI is.
It does dig those up.
Yeah, I'm certain there's been studies done on that, I'm sure. Yep.
There's a farmer in North Carolina named Russell Hedrick, and I've attended a seminar of his. He said he's been doing these conservation practices on his cotton, soy, peanut, and corn rotation of 800 acres for about 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not farm organically. He just uses the practices, cover cropping and adding organic matter when he can. And he said that he said two things that stood out to me. One was that in 1 year on his 800 acres, he saved about $170,000 worth of inputs onto his
I think that's
operation.
the key, is you're saving money on what you put into it.
Right.
Yep.
And then the other thing is that he's, over the 11 years, he's been able to increase his infiltration from like 1 inch per hour up to, in extreme cases, 15 inches per hour.
So all of that rain's going through his soil into his sponge. Residue management, I think you guys were talking about that a little bit inside, about residue management and how to farm through that much residue. So yeah, this is a lot of residue, but when you build this system and you build the biology and the microbiology that's happening in these soils, residue will decompose quite quickly in a no-till or strip-till situation with cover crops. The key for no-till and reduced till is combining that with cover crops. That's when they did studies in the Midwest about no-till forage, no-till systems, they didn't work until they added cover crops, and that's when they started to see the huge increase in yield and organic matter. And so just keeping the soils alive, keeping that diversity, living roots in the soil. And again, there looks like a lot of residue, but if the system's working correctly, this will be burned pretty quick through with the microorganisms, the fungus, the bacteria, all of the things that we're feeding in that soil.
Now, the organic matter thing, we cannot measure it down here. We measure it up.
And I didn't measure it. Yeah, I did not measure organic matter. It was just a visual observation of what it. I know this one has more organic matter than this one.
That's very true.
But I don't know how much more.
And if you were to measure, we could have some. Now, high school kids, they always ask those questions. When you're dealing with youth, what is the pitch?
I don't deal with youth.
You don't? Not at all?
Nope. My target audience is you guys right here, farmers.
Anybody in your shop who deals with youth?
Nope. Beginning farmers, new farmers. Our target audience is folks that have grazing operations and grow forages.
Ah, you have the grazing people.
Yep.